Welcome to another episode of the Dan Norton Show. It is Wednesday, May 14th, 2025 at 1 p.m. Pacific. Middle of the week. I put in the show title, You Bring the Topics. So I'm here to talk about whatever you want to talk about. So feel free to raise any issues you like in the chat. And they could be comments, they could be questions. And you could also call in. I've got a phone line. And I put all the info in the chat. So to call the show, all you need to do is click the link in the chat, which I've pinned. So there's a Zoom link there. Or you can dial in by a phone number. And the phone number is 669-444-9171. Then you will be prompted to enter a Zoom meeting ID, which is 883-027-494-57, followed by the pound sign. And then you'll be prompted to enter the pound sign a second time, which will get you into the waiting room on Zoom. So that's how you call in, and those instructions are pinned in the chat on YouTube. I also put them in the description in the video, under the video on YouTube. So whatever works better for you. Feel free to call in. We had a call last time, had a debate about capitalism, mostly about capitalism. I think it went on for at least an hour. Someone from Germany called in. Bored. I'm not sure if that's how I pronounce his name, but he called in from Germany, although he's Turkish. And we had a nice conversation. So that was good. I was really happy to have that. I thought maybe I would clip that out and make it its own video on my channel at some point. So I might do that. And maybe I'll do that with some other segments as well. We had a couple other people trying to call in, but they didn't have a chance to stick around. So maybe they'll try calling back in today. We'll see. Or maybe new people will call in. I always like to meet new people, so feel free to say hello in the chat. I see we got a few people here. And anyone's welcome to call in, whatever your level of knowledge is of Ayn Rand, which is the theme of my channel. I like to promote Ayn Rand's ideas here and her philosophy of objectivism, which I've been studying for decades, but I want to introduce new people to her ideas. A lot of people don't know about her ideas, and what I want to do with this channel is to expose new people to Ayn Rand's ideas. So I welcome new people. Feel free to participate in the chat or call in, and we can have a little get to know you session. But also, if you're a veteran, if you've been following me for years, if you've been reading Ayn Rand for decades, you can participate too. So it's open to all of the above. All right, so I have a couple updates on what I've been reading. I often talk about what I've been reading in between shows. That's what I spend a lot of my time doing. So I've continued my reading about the backstory to Israel. which was founded in 1948, the State of Israel. But I've been wanting to learn more about the period leading up to the founding, so prior to 1948. In particular, recently, I have been focused on the World War I era. So I think there was a Zionist movement, which was the movement to found the State of Israel or found a home for the Jews in Palestine. And I think some people saw World War I as an opportunity to make some progress on that front, shake some things up. Maybe if you could defeat the Ottoman Empire, which had control over Palestine at that time, then maybe you could now make progress in starting a home for the Jews in Palestine if you defeat the Ottoman Empire. So I've been reading about the Balfour Declaration, which was named after Arthur Balfour, a foreign secretary for the British, who previously was prime minister. But at the time of this declaration, in 1917, he was the foreign minister. Although I think it actually might have been, there were a number of drafts of this. It's very short, by the way. I was thinking maybe I should just show it on stream. Maybe I'll do that in a little bit. But it's only like one paragraph, just a few sentences. And this was composed by a number of people, and it went through different drafts. And I was reading that some historians think that maybe it should be named after some of the other people who had a hand in drafting it. But in any case, his name is the one that stuck with it. So this was the declaration of Britain's support for there being a home for the Jews in Palestine. Prior to this, there was a Zionist movement of Jews which wanted to have a state in Israel or in Palestine, because it wasn't called Israel at that time. Well, maybe there was some historical precedent for that term. But anyway, not too important at this stage to go into that. But there was a Zionist movement of Jews, but there wasn't a major world power to back up and support the establishment of a state for Jews. But that happened for the first time with this Balfour Declaration, when the UK stepped in and said, we think there should be a state for the Jews, or a home. I guess that's part of there's controversy surrounding this issue, whether the intention was to establish a state or just a home, which leaves it kind of ambiguous as to exactly what is being set up. But in any case, there was a support, at least for a home, whatever that means, in Palestine, support from the British, enunciated in this Balfour Declaration. So let me actually share my screen and put that up on, so we can all see the Balfour Declaration. Just a moment. Okay. Okay. All right, there it is. As I mentioned, it's quite short. So it's dated November 2nd, 1917. And it's addressed to Lord Rothschild, who was one of the leaders of the pro-Zionist movements, I believe, in Britain. There were a number of Rothschilds. There was a whole family of Rothschilds. And I believe this was Walter Rothschild, who I think at this time he was the head of the Rothschild family in England. There was also a branch of the Rothschilds in France, but he's in England. And this letter is addressed to him from Arthur Balfour, who writes, "I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the cabinet." And then here's the one paragraph with the declaration. It says, quote, "His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country," unquote. And then he finishes it off by saying, "I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Yours, Arthur Balfour." All right, so there it is. That's it. It's so short. I didn't realize until just a few days ago when I read this for the first time how short it was. You hear so much about it if you're learning about history of Israel that you might think it's a much longer document, but no, that's all. That's just that one paragraph here. So a few things about it. One is, as I mentioned, it talks about a national home for the Jewish people. It doesn't say a state, although maybe that's what was intended, where you have a government. But there's some wiggle room there. So I think there was some controversy later over to exactly, or maybe even controversy at the time among the people who were drafting this. How exactly should we phrase this? Should we talk about a state for the Jewish people or just a home, and then maybe figure out later exactly what the status of it is going to be? And then this phrase "in Palestine" is another issue. I think at a certain time it was going to be "of Palestine," or something other than "in Palestine," which might imply that the Jews' home or state, whatever it was going to be, would take up all of Palestine, as opposed to just being in like one part of Palestine. So there's also some controversy surrounding that phrase. And then also in the end of this paragraph, or the second half of it, it says, "It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine." So there are already some non-Jewish people there. Actually, they were in the majority. There was a minority of Jews at this time. I think it was just a few percent of the population, but most of the population was non-Jewish. They were mostly Muslim. And this is saying that even though we support this home for the Jews, we're not going to set that up in a way that infringes on the rights of the pre-existing non-Jewish population that's already there. Now, you might think that the British reneged on that, and they didn't actually follow through on that. And I think that's what some of the Arabs who were the non-Jewish population there, they thought that their rights were not respected. And I guess there's some controversy around that. And then, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So there was a diaspora of Jews, or like a spreading out of Jews throughout other places in the world, in Europe and in the United States. And I guess the idea here was saying, even though we're going to set up this state for the Jews in Palestine, that's not going to take away any rights that Jews have in other places that they might be living. So you might think, okay, well, if their home is Palestine, then I guess we can kick them out of Russia or the United States or wherever else they might be living. And this is saying, no, setting up this home for them in Palestine doesn't prejudice the rights or political status enjoyed by the Jews in any other country where they might be living right now. I think that's the point, or at least part of the point of including this last part. Okay, so I think that's all I want to show here. So I'm going to stop this screen share now. All right. Oh, I see we got a comment came in through the chat from Dennis. Hi, Dennis. By the way, if you're here watching the stream and you like it or want to help promote it in the algorithm, I'd appreciate it if you give the stream a like. And also, definitely love to have the new subscribers. So if you want to help the growth of the channel and get notified of whenever I go live or put out a new video, I invite you to subscribe. And you can click that notification bell to get notified of when new content from my channel comes out. So I was really happy last show to announce, or I was happy to announce, but even more happy to get new subscribers, which occurred in the wake of going on Your On Brooks show. So that was something I talked about a little bit on my last show. I submitted a super chat that is like a donation in connection with a question to Your On Brooks show. He's another objectivist podcaster who has a much larger audience than I do right now. But I think that I know there's some overlap in people who listen to his show and also listen to my show, because some of the people who submit super chats to his show have also appeared on my show and even called in, like Friend Harper. He's a name that I recognized from submitting super chats on Your On's show, and he's called into my show a couple times. And I know some other people who listen to Your On show have also been here on the chat. So I thought it might be a good idea to advertise my show on Your On's, and maybe that would increase my subscribers, and it definitely did. I had a nice bump in subscribers after I did a little super chat ad on Your On show. So welcome to any Your On Brooks show listeners. All right, so let me get to this chat from Denis. He says, hi, do you agree that determinism is an epistemological category about practical predictability rather than a metaphysical judgment? What is predictability after all without actual predictability? All right, I'm going to have to read that again to process that. My brain is still thinking about Israel and the Balfour Declaration and what I've been reading. So it's I've got to make a transition here. Hold on. I got to take a sip of water too. I also have been thinking about the Arab Revolt, which occurred during World War I. Maybe I'll talk about that later, but I want to engage some here with the chat first and invite other people to chat as well. As I said in the title to the stream, you bring the topics. So not necessarily all the topics. Sometimes I have topics that I want to say a little on, maybe just give an update like I've done with my reading. But I guess if I had topics to start out the show with, like if people were already putting them in the chat before I even started talking about anything, then I would just go straight into those unless there was something I really felt it was important to say. Excuse me. But I think I would give priority to topics that come in the chat. And um, I guess if there's nothing coming in, then that's a good time to go to some of the updates on my reading or other topics that I have to discuss. But priority would go to the chat. Or anyone who wants to call in. All right, so let me see if I can get my brain onto a different topic now from Denis. So again, he asks, do I agree that determinism is an epistemological category about practical predictability rather than a metaphysical judgment? What is predictability, after all, without actual predictability? Okay, so just to clarify the two distinct aspects that I think he's raising, determinism I think of as primarily a metaphysical viewpoint, the view that reality only happens in one way, one possible way. There's no alternative possibilities to the way things happen. So right now you're listening to my live stream, and according to determinism, if you believe that view, you had to listen to this live stream. There was no choice about it. Everything in the past was leading up to this, going back to the Big Bang or the formation of the universe, or the reformation. Maybe it always existed, it just changed its form. The explosion of stars, the formation of the Earth, the evolution of species on Earth. There was just one path all of that could have taken, and it was all leading up to you right now listening to my live stream. It couldn't have gone any differently. So it's a metaphysical doctrine, and your future is entirely planned out. So if you end up winning the lottery in 30 years from now, that was predetermined. It couldn't have happened any differently. Or if you break your arm, that would be a less happy outcome than winning the lottery. But if you break your arm in 10 years, that also was predetermined. Just given the laws of physics, or exactly what determines it, I guess that could be disputed. Maybe some people would have a religious kind of determinism where they think there is a God and the God controls everything. Or you might have a non-religious sort of view where you think, no, it's not a God that determines everything. It's like the laws of physics. It's just given the nature of the particles we're made up of, they act and interact in a certain way, such that it all led up to you breaking your arm in 10 years or winning the lottery in 30 years or whatever. So now whether you can predict that or not, that's a separate issue. So that's the epistemological issue. I guess if you have something like Newton's laws or Maxwell's laws, and you think whatever happens in the world is determined by the laws of physics, well, you might think I can predict the future if I just plug in to the variables the right quantities or whatever, then I can predict what's going to happen in the future. But that's a separate issue from whether what's going to happen is going to happen. So prediction is epistemological, having to do with not what you can know. So Denis is asking if I agree that determinism is an epistemological category about practical predictability rather than a metaphysical judgment. So to that, I would answer no. I think it is a metaphysical judgment. Now, it could have epistemological implications or corollaries, like it might follow from the fact that the world is metaphysically determined that you could, at least in principle or in theory, predict it if you had a sophisticated enough um, calculating instruments and enough knowledge. Like there's something called Laplace's demon, named after a French mathematician, I believe, Laplace. And this was a thought experiment that he had. I think he might have been an 18th century scientist or philosopher. And he had this idea that of a demon who could, I guess he was super knowledgeable or intelligent, who could calculate what's going to happen in the future. Like if you know the state of everything at a certain time, and then you know the laws according to which all the particles in the world operate, then you could just, um, I, I guess these days we might more likely think in terms of putting it into a computer program and then calculating what the outcome is going to be. But maybe in Laplace's day, he thought more in terms of a demon who I guess maybe was a super knowledgeable, super intelligent being who maybe had a very powerful brain. And if this demon knew the state of all the matter in the universe and the laws, and if he also knew what the laws of the universe were, like Newton's laws, then he could tell what's going to happen in the future. Now, he could not do that if there is such a thing as free will, because if there is free will, then that means the future is not determined. And it doesn't matter if you are omniscient about the present state of things or the laws of physics, because that doesn't suffice to tell you what's going to happen in the future if there's something like free will, which you might also call choice. Now, side note, many philosophers these days think that free will and determinism are compatible. They're called compatibilists. I don't think that's a coherent point of view. I reject that. So setting aside the compatibilists who think that determinism and free will are compatible, and many of whom also think determinism and moral responsibility are compatible, I also reject that view. Setting aside those compatibilists and just taking what I think is the objectivist view of free will, that is Ayn Rand's view of free will. She called her philosophy Objectivism, for anyone who didn't know. On Rand's view of free will, on my view of free will, which I learned from Rand, they're not compatible. And if determinism is true, then there is no free will. And if free will is true, then determinism is not true. So I don't think the future is entirely predictable because I think humans do have free will. You can make educated guesses. I mean, some things are, you could give a certain likelihood. Like it's likely, given your knowledge of me, that I'm going to do certain things in the future, like talk about Ayn Rand's philosophy and promote her philosophy, as opposed to talking about and promoting communism or some very different philosophy. But can you guarantee that? I will never do that. I don't think so, because I have free will. I could start thinking about things differently or start evading, choosing to use my mind in a different way. And maybe in 10, 20 years from now, I would radically change my brain by having chosen to think in such a different way. Then maybe in 10, 20, 30 years, I would start doing something like promoting communism. I don't think it's possible tomorrow that I would do that, because I think it takes time to rewire your own brain. But I think at some point it's possible. So, but I think you could say it's unlikely that I would do that. At least, I guess the likelihood varies depending on how far from now it is. So if it's extremely unlikely, I would say, that I would start promoting communism within a year of now. Extremely unlikely. it's not as unlikely that I would start promoting it in 30 years from now. Um, so I think there is, you can assign likeliness or probability to something, um, even though you can't guarantee it's going to happen or not happen because of something like free will. All right, I see we got some more people participating in the chat. That's good to see. So thank you and welcome. I see some screen names here that I don't think I've seen before, and it's always good to see some new people here. So thanks for joining, and let me read some of your chats. So there's one that came in from Jean Cedeno. He just says, "Hi, I'm Jean Cedeno." Hi, Jean. I wonder where you're from. I like to know where people are from. You don't have to tell me, of course, but I'm curious where my audience is. I've had people from Europe call in or participate in the chat, like some people from Bulgaria, Scandinavia, um, Sweden, Amsterdam, Netherlands. It's really interesting getting people from around the world showing up. I guess it's for you, it's probably, I guess it's maybe 9 or 9:30 or 10:30 Europe time. Okay. Maybe that's an Italian name, Jean Cedeno. But I'm not sure. Portuguese. Um, Anyways, okay. So welcome, Jean. Let me go on to the next one from Oliver Sandberg. Another new person. Welcome, Oliver. And maybe you're not new to my channel, but you're at least new to the chat because I don't recognize your name. But anyways, Oliver asks, do I get sponsored or have a connection to ARI? No, I don't. I'm entirely independent of anyone, including ARI. I'm just doing this entirely on my own. I have attended ARI's educational program in the past. And even before that, I actually worked at ARI many years ago, many years ago. Mostly just in an administrative capacity. I was not doing intellectual work like writing or speaking when I started there. I just did administrative work. And actually, I did move eventually. I switched positions from an administrative position to also doing some writing for the newsletter. They had a fundraising newsletter that was sent out each month to the donors. It was called Impact. I'm not sure if they still put out that newsletter, but it was just like an update on the programs of the Institute and the progress that they had been making, which is a way of helping motivate donors to contribute money to the Institute. So I helped write that newsletter for a while when I was there, but then I left after a few years there and did some other things. I got into tutoring for a while and did that for several years, and eventually I went to graduate school. And it was actually, well, actually, I was in the undergraduate program. They had a distinct undergraduate program and graduate program when I was working at ARI, and I happened to be in the undergraduate program of the Institute the same time I was working there. So I was in that program for 4 years. It was a 4-year program. It's changed over time. Like later they had a 3-year program. I think they had a 1-year program at a certain time, and I don't know what it is these days. And they also changed the name of it. It used to be called the Objectivist Academic Center. That was the name of their program for training intellectuals. And they've since renamed the program. It's currently called Ayn Rand University. And it doesn't do exactly the same thing. I think it's pitched to a broader audience. But in the last few years, they started calling it the Ayn Rand University. And I've never been involved in the program since it's been called that. I was always involved when it was called the Objectivist Academic Center. Um, I think the name change happened maybe about 4 years ago, or 4 or 5 years ago. So 2021, 2020, something around there. Um, but I was also in the graduate program of the OAC, Objectivist Academic Center, when I was in graduate school. Um, so and for that was for, well, it's a little complicated, but about 5 years I was in the institute's graduate program. And then after I finished grad school, I started my YouTube channel. Actually, right as I was finishing grad school, like a few months before I graduated, is when I started this channel in 2019. And I just started it on my own. It's not affiliated with any other organization, although I have been, as I mentioned, I have gone through ARI's educational programs for many years. Okay. Okay, let me read some more of these chats. Thanks again for the comments and questions. Oh, I see someone has entered the waiting room on Zoom. Perel, another new name. Okay, I want to get to that call, but let me first at least take a quick look at the rest of the chats that have come in, and maybe I'll say more about them later. But I just want to see if there's anything quick that I want to respond to now. Okay, so the back of Dr. Manhattan's head. Wow, that's quite a screen name. The back of Dr. Manhattan's head. Okay, I have no idea what that is a reference to. But anyways, that person asks, why does will being free make it unpredictable? Okay, maybe I'll say something on that later. By the way, I plan to stick around for my shows are usually hour and a half to 2 hours, but there's no strict time limit on it. So there might be time to address some of these more. I don't know how the call is going to go, how long it's going to be, but I want to go to the call pretty soon. But after that call, there might be time to talk more about some of these comments in the chat. And then I see Dennis put in a new one. But in order to claim determinism, one would have to observe and understand the mechanics of determinism to prove it. So one has to have practical predictability for the claim of determinism, I mean. Okay. And then the back of Dr. Manhattan's head. I've got to come up with a shorter way to say that. Like, maybe I'll just say Manhattan's head to keep it a little shorter and more simple for now. So Manhattan's head. By the way, if you want to explain that, that would be interesting. He says, but, quote, can you guarantee it, unquote, applies to something like the laws of physics too, since we have incomplete theories and necessarily finite precision. Okay, then Ewan Moran, another new person, I think. Welcome. He says, communism has become an eventuality on this earth. And then Based Shrine, another new person. Welcome. He says, what are your thoughts on Nietzsche? Then Manhattan's head says, this is a slow stream. Haha. Okay. And then Sandberg asked a question. What do I think of Charles II? Okay, so there's a lot of material here I could talk about, and I'm really glad to see all the engagement there because now I have more things I can talk about. Um, and the point here is to engage with people in the chat, so that's great. But I do want to take this call, so I'm going to do that first now, and then I'll come back to the chat after the call and engage with some of these chat messages and maybe in any other new chat messages that come in. All right, so oh, Oliver says he's from Sweden, by the way. Ah, nice. Welcome. Welcome. And just while it's on my mind, before I forget, if you like the stream, I'd appreciate a like and also definitely appreciate new subscribers. Okay. I have just admitted Perel into the Zoom call. Perel, you are on, although your mic is muted, so I cannot hear you if you are trying to speak. There's a little red mic in the lower left. I'm not sure how you toggle it on your end, but right now you are muted, so I can't hear anything. I don't know if you stepped away for a minute, but I'll give you a minute to see if you can. Maybe I'll type here in the Zoom chat, which only you and I can see right now. I just said, hi, you are muted in the Zoom chat. Maybe Pharrell will see that. All right, so it is, I'll give one more minute for Perel to show up or figure out how to unmute. And if he doesn't have it by then I'll just go back to the chat. Okay. All right. Let's see. Maybe I can answer some of these in the chat quickly. I've talked a little about Nietzsche in a previous live stream. I also have a short video on my channel about him. Just very, very briefly. I actually haven't read much Nietzsche myself. I've read very little. I've read some excerpts of him in other works, like in History of Philosophies, but I haven't just like sat down with one of his books and read it. I think it's mostly just been some excerpts. So a lot of what I know about Nietzsche is based on secondhand accounts, secondary sources writing about him, or like lectures on his philosophy. But based on what I've learned from secondary sources as well as the little bit of primary sources, my understanding is that Nietzsche was part of the irrationalist German tradition of the 19th century, growing out of Kant's philosophy. So that would put him quite at odds with the objectivist pro-reason philosophy. Although early in her life, Ayn Rand was quite sympathetic, I think, to some of Nietzsche's points of view. I think maybe she saw him as pro-man or pro-heroism in certain ways. I know Nietzsche is famous for attacking Christianity and its worship of meekness and humility, that sort of aspect of Christianity, and maybe that's what resonated with Ayn Rand, or at least part of what Ayn Rand resonated with. She thought she was very much in favor of pride, making the best out of yourself, not thinking of yourself as weak and humble and small by nature, as sinful and wretched and miserable. I guess you can make yourself into that depending on the kind of choices you you make, going back to the issue of free will, how do you construct yourself? What kind of character do you make? But you're not that way by nature. You're not by nature miserable or unworthy or a sinner. There's no original sin. So I think that might have been part of what Ayn Rand saw as valuable in Nietzsche, but I would need to verify that. But I know that there was some period in her life. She actually was thinking about including quotes from Nietzsche in The Fountainhead. All right, that was disgusting. I am sorry. That actually got a expletive out of me. So I will have to cut that out later if I can. Uh, I have to submit a report to Zoom right now um, of what just happened. Offensive, illegal, or abusive, suicide or self-harm, private information, spam, copyright or trademark infringement, impersonation. I'll tell you later. Those are the categories I can choose from for the abuse that just happened. So I don't know if I want to describe this, but this person just showed up on camera in a very offensive way, in a very extremely inappropriate way. And I tried to mute this person as fast as I could and turn off the video as fast as I could and remove him from the call as fast as I could. Um, but anyways, I'm trying to see what the stream looks like on my phone. Oh, so you got a couple new subscribers. Great. Um, okay. Well, I don't want to hold on a second. Showed up on camera. I'll tell you later. Expletive out of me. So. Oh, Ewan Moran just says in the chat, I think you're okay. I didn't see anything offensive, just some horrible sounds. Oh, okay. Well, that's good. Did anyone see anything other than me? Because it was actually pornographic. Um, so I really hope that didn't show up on screen. Um, I'm trying to rewind to the point in the live stream where this interruption occurred. Oliver Sandberg says yes. I don't. Does that mean yes, you saw the other person? Oh, darn. Okay, Base Shrine says unfortunately yes. Okay. Um, oh, I see someone else just entered the waiting room. Okay, hold on. Uh, oh, then Uan says, okay, I was clearly looking away then. Thank God. Okay. Yeah, I think if it shows up on screen for me, then it also shows up for you. Um, all right. Hold on a second. Yep. It showed up and I see it now. Um, maybe I'll take a screenshot of this so I can submit it to Zoom, and maybe they can block this person's account or do something to punish this person. Um, but anyways, I think there's a way that I can edit this stream later and clip out, any part I want. So I will definitely plan to cut that out. So I apologize for that. I guess this is one of the risks of doing a live show on Zoom, where I just open it up to random callers. So maybe there's a better way to screen these people out. Like maybe if I don't recognize the name, I should like have them engage in chat first as I guess, one way to see if they're, I don't know if that would help me screen people, but anyways, I have to think about if there's a way to avoid this kind of thing. Um, I mean, I guess I could do audio only, but it would be unfortunate if I had to penalize everyone else because of this one creature. Like anyone else who wants to be on screen and who's not crazy. And it's more engaging for the audience if they can see someone, but there's a risk here. So I don't know if there's a way for me to see someone's video before they appear. Anyways, I got to think more about this. But for right now, I'm just going to submit this report to Zoom, and I have to choose a category. So I'm going to choose offensive, illegal, or abusive. Yeah, I think that's a good one. Okay. Include desktop. Oh, it's giving me a chance to include a screenshot now. By sending this report, you authorize Zoom to access all data in this report, subject to Zoom's privacy statement. This data includes screenshots, your user information, the user information of those you reported, and all relevant meeting information. All right. Give me a minute to make a screenshot. How do I get to the points? Let me test something else. Seeing how I change the... Oh, I don't know if I can change the screenshot. I think it might only allow me to choose the way the screen looked after I removed his video from the call. Okay. Well, I took a screenshot on my phone, so I guess maybe I can send that later if there's an opportunity to. Oliver says, can't you do the report later? I don't know. I'm just going to hit submit now. Okay, it says, thank you for submitting a report. Our trust and safety team will send you an email after the meeting to learn more about the incident. Okay, so I guess I can go into more detail or supply any screenshots. later by email. All right. Sorry for this interruption. Um, Freedom Fries says, "What the F is this?" Yeah, good question. That was pretty crazy. Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I will definitely try to cut that out later and see if there's any way I can avoid the possibility of that happening in the future without, penalizing other people, and making, it impossible to do live video with any random person. Um, Maybe there's, I think OBS maybe that's a solution because I know that's a commonly used software that many streamers use. And I know if you use that, there's a way to see someone's video without streaming it. So I could do that. I used OBS once or twice in the past, not for a live stream, just for making a pre-recorded video. And I think it has a higher learning curve than the setup I've got right now with just Zoom and YouTube. So if I am going to do that, it might take a while to figure it out. So hopefully there's a quicker solution, which I'll have to think about. Base Shrine says it was only like 3 seconds. Okay, well, I'm glad it wasn't more than 3 seconds, but still any amount is too much of that. It's pretty disgusting. Okay, now let's see if I can get my brain off of that. Um, Base Shrine says, yeah, just set up OBS so that it shows your webcam on its own. And if you're having an actual discussion, you can switch the screen being streamed to Zoom. Okay. Um, I actually might want to get a new laptop for that. I might need a new one anyways. I think that might have been part of the reason I was having trouble with OBS when I initially used it. I'm not sure it's entirely compatible with the computer I'm using right now. So maybe I need to upgrade. Um, okay, I don't know if I'm going to read all of these. Okay, so let me see if I can. Oh yeah, I forgot. Oh, there was two different people who've now tried to call into Zoom. So one of them I recognize the name, but that person is no longer here. This person left the waiting room, but now a second person has entered the waiting room whose name I'm not sure. And now I'm a little scared. I don't know if I want to take the call. Is it possible this is the same person who has just um, changed username? I certainly don't want to take the call if that's happened. So I don't know. Karen S. That's the name I see now in the Zoom waiting room. Um, so Karen S. Can you uh, identify yourself in chats? You can either say something in the YouTube chat, or actually maybe it's better if you say something in the Zoom chat. Um, uh, yeah. I just said hi Karen S in Zoom chat. So can you reply to that chat, Karen S in Zoom? I can actually think I do know one person whose first name is Karen and whose last initial is S, but there could be many people who fit that description. Um, so I don't know if you're the one I'm thinking of. So I'm going to wait to see if Karen S replies in Zoom before taking this call. Ay, ay, ay. No reply so far. Uh, I see there's a little back and forth in the chat. Looks like maybe because Freedom Prize says, I don't like Rand because of her disdain for altruism. And then Oliver Sandberg says, what's wrong about not liking altruism? How do you define altruism? So I forgot you all can engage with each other. You don't have to just engage with me. And maybe now is a good time to engage with each other since there's been such a distraction on my end, trying to deal with this situation that came up. All right, so Karen S, I still don't see any reply to you from you in the Zoom chat. So I think I might just disconnect you because I don't recognize you from anywhere. Um, Maybe I'll give you like 30 more seconds to say something in the Zoom chat. I will disconnect you in 30 seconds if you don't reply here in Zoom chat. Okay, the clock is ticking. All right, let me see what else is here. Gosh, I've never seen anything like that happen before in a live stream. I wonder if that was like, well, I'm not going to speculate. All right, no reply from Karen S, whoever that is. Oh, now there's two people in the waiting room. I wonder if Karen S is still, yeah, Karen S is still one of them. But I am going to remove Karen S because I have no idea who that is and don't want to take a chance right now, at least. Okay. Once removed, Karen S will not be able to rejoin the meeting. Okay. Remove. Okay. Now it's giving me a chance to submit another report. I don't think I'm going to submit a report on that one. Okay. So the other person who's now in the waiting room is Arran, Arran. Now, who is Arran? I don't recognize that name either. I haven't seen that in the chats. Um, so is this another? I don't know if this is a legit person or not. I'm just typing in the Zoom chat. Hi, Arran. Please reply in the Zoom chat. Oliver Sandberg says, "You are really losing me. This is getting boring." I apologize. Yeah, I know these issues are very unusual. They've never happened on my stream before, and maybe I'll have a smoother way, quicker way to deal with him in the future. But this is all completely new to me, so I've got a learning curve here. I mean, it's great when I can take live calls, and I've done that many times in the past, and I want to be able to continue doing that, but I want to do it in a way that's obviously um, not going to have the problem that we had today. So um, I've got to figure out a system so that we can take the advantage of live Zoom calls without the disadvantage. Um, Freedom says 30 seconds here. Why would I continue watching? I wonder, I wonder if you could have been one of the people who called in for all I know. Um, you're free to leave, Freedom Prize, if it's boring. You don't have to stick around for this drama, if you want to call it drama. But yeah, sometimes, something might come up that I need to deal with, and it's not obvious how to best deal with it. So I'm learning in real time here on what is a good policy, and exactly how much time to spend on this. I've got multiple people trying to call in. I don't know if they're all crazy people. I don't know if some of them are legit. I'm trying to do a little bit of screening now by talking to them behind the scenes in the Zoom chat. And but you certainly don't have to be here and wait through all of this. You can come back later after I've tried to edit the stream, and cut out any parts. Maybe, I don't know if I'll certainly try to cut out the pornographic part from that person who was here for a few seconds. Now, all the stuff after it, when I'm like right now, when I'm trying to manage the stream, I don't know if I'll cut all that out, but maybe I'll just put in a timestamp in the description or something so people can quickly skip over to when I get back to the main content. So you don't have to wait through it all. Okay, Freedom Fry says thanks. Okay. Oh, so the back of Dr. Manhattan's head says it's him in the waiting room. Dog. DAWG. And Base Shrine says if Arran is Manhattan's head like he claims, then I would let him in because he has an intellectual stake in genuine discussion. Can you reply in the Zoom chat, Arran? I sent so if that is you, Manhattan's head, if that's you who shows up as Arran, ARRAN, in the Zoom call, can you reply to the Zoom chat? I don't know if you can see that before I admit you. Maybe you could let me know in the YouTube chat. I think you might have to let me know that. Oh, whoever Karen S was, maybe she couldn't, if it's a she, maybe she couldn't reply in the Zoom chat because I hadn't admitted her yet. So maybe, okay. But I guess she could have at least let me know, like Arran says, that she was the same person, maybe by a different name in the YouTube chat. Okay. Okay, so Manhattan's head says he doesn't see a chat box on Zoom. I just see host has joined. We'll let them know. Okay. I think you're probably legit. What did you say? Oh, you were asking about Nietzsche before. So you were having some legit conversation. All right. I'm going to take a chance now. on Manhattan's head, and I guess I can try to cut it out later if it's not a legit person, but hopefully it is. All right, here we go. I'm going to try to take another call. Fingers crossed. I don't even know if there's going to be video. Maybe some people just do audio only.
Oh, hello.
All right, Arran, I can hear you, and I don't see you.
No, I don't have a camera, I'm afraid.
That's okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, let me catch my breath here. Jeez, I guess I get a little nervous when I'm turning on the Zoom, given what just happened a little while ago.
Yeah, well, I suppose you never know, right? You never know. It's a bit of a gamble, isn't it?
Yeah, and I guess someone could. Someone who's doing audio only could all of a sudden turn on their video and do the same thing, but hopefully that
that's
doesn't
like
happen. But I guess
sophisticated.
that could happen even if it's like I screen someone on OBS, like if I have that some kind of setup. If I'm in the middle of a conversation with someone who seems fine on video, and then all of a sudden they do something crazy, well, I don't know if there's anything I can do about that. Short of like, I can cut it out later, but during the live stream, I don't know if there's any way to avoid that. Although if there's like a time delay, maybe that's I think some radio stations, there's like a 10 or 20-second time delay, and they can blank out the last 10 seconds or something. So maybe that's a way to deal with these sorts of things, at least in the radio world or live TV worlds, if you have like a professional network. But I don't know if there's any way for me to do something like that. But anyway, welcome to the stream. And was there anything? Well, you want to introduce yourself or say what you were interested in talking about?
Yeah, okay. I mean, just that my name's pronounced Arran, just regular, just a funny spell.
Arran.
But I don't have anything else to introduce myself with. I had I guess I just found your YouTube channel tonight. Actually, I just saw it on YouTube's homepage, I think. So I saw something on one of your other, I think one of the videos you uploaded. Maybe it was like a recording of a call you'd done into another show. I think it was, and then something in the comments I saw is what I wanted to talk about. If it's all right with you, was about the law of identity. So I think it was a discussion you had with one of the other commenters. I think unfortunately it looked like it ended a bit prematurely.
Okay, so you're completely new to my stream and Ayn Rand, but you saw some video on my channel about the law of identity.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, I'm not completely new to Ayn Rand, but
Okay. By the way, I'm hearing some noise in the. I don't know if it's a background noise or like a phone hiss or something.
Maybe it's just the fans on my laptop. I'm not sure.
Okay, I'm not sure what's causing it, but I can
I'll
hear
mute
you
myself when I'm not speaking. So.
Okay, yeah, I can hear you okay. I just don't know if there's any way to get rid of that hissing sort of noise. Yeah, I don't hear it right now, so maybe you changed something, but
yeah, I'm just pressing a mute button when I'm not speaking now, so hopefully it won't be annoying.
Okay, yeah, so that does seem to help because I don't hear you. I don't hear the hissing right now, and when I do hear you, I start to hear that hissing noise. But hopefully I'll be able to distinguish your voice from that. All right, so you want to talk about the law of identity. A is A, for anyone who doesn't know. This is a fundamental axiom of Ayn Rand's philosophy, and she didn't originate it. It's much older. It's part of the Aristotle. I don't think he explicitly mentions the law of identity, but he talks about the law of non-contradiction and the law of excluded middle. And these are corollaries of the law of identity. Anyways, this is a fundamental point in Ayn Rand's philosophy, and I guess you said you saw some comments on one of my videos about this, and you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah. So I suppose it's what I'm after is a sort of like elaboration, I think. So I'll just use like one example, but you can pick a different one if it's like preferable. I'm not massively interested in the specifics at the moment. But so, for example, this law of identity, which I would normally understand to be just like it's sort of like a rule, right, in logic, and then you have premises, which are kind of the inputs you feed into logic, and then you have the rules that you use to manipulate information to get some kind of like outcome. But the way that it seems that you talk about the law of identity, or how you say Ayn Rand talks about it, it seems like it's sort of a premise in itself, right? It's about like a statement about reality or something. So an example you gave was something like, I think one of the commenters said, "Oh, like what's an example of people in the world today implicitly denying?" Well, I think it was you saying implicitly, but implicitly denying the law of identity. And an example you gave is like, oh, well, some people, they believe in God, or they believe prayer will change something. And I think there was a couple of other examples, which is why I say I don't really, if there's an example that you find easier to talk about, that's fine. But I guess what I would just be interested in would be like an elaboration of how one of those things, like some believe in God or whatever you pick, like could you specify how that comes down to like denying the law or the law of identity in like a more specific way?
Okay. Yeah. So just a little background on this conversation that you heard on my channel, I guess. I think you're referring to a call I made to Sam Cedar's show, The Majority Report. I believe it was my 5th call to his show. They're all on my channel in a playlist, I think. So if anyone wants to hear this call, you can check that out. So I brought up the law of identity, and in that call, I guess I mentioned that maybe in the context of a discussion of why does it matter, like what is the importance of this, or just explaining what the law meant, I guess as part of addressing that issue, I talked about how prayer to God it could be seen as a violation of the law of identity. And I guess you're asking, why is that? Or maybe that's part of what you're asking, if I could elaborate.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So the law of identity, I think it is understood in Ayn Rand's philosophy in a maybe broader way, is the way to put it, than it often is in other uses in philosophy. Like if you go to academic philosophy, if you take classes in universities these days, you might only come across the issue of the law of identity in like a deductive logic course. It might be presented as an axiom of deduction. Ayn Rand has a broader view of it than that. It does play a role in deduction. That is the inference of particular cases from general principles, like all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is immortal. That would be a case of inferring from this general principle, all men are mortal, to this particular case, Socrates is mortal. But Ayn Rand has she on her view, there's a place for the law of identity, which is much broader than just deducing things. So it's a way of saying that things are what they are. They have a specific nature. They're not just anything you want them to be. So a rock is a rock. That would be an instance of the law of identity. And what does that imply? Well, it implies it's not a non-rock. That would be the most immediate corollary or implication of it. So don't treat a rock as a non-rock, or you're going to be frustrated, right? If you try to treat a rock as a bottle of water and you try to drink it, well, you're going to be frustrated. That's not going to work out well for you. You need to treat things as they are, not as some other sort of thing. Now, when you pray to God, you can see that as a way of like wishing you could make things different than you are. Like I hope that this rock will turn into a bottle of a water. Maybe you're in the desert and you're in a survival kind of situation, and you might think, if you're a primitive person who hasn't learned that the world has a lawful nature and things can't just change based on whatever you wish or want them to be. You might think that either you, or if not you, you can pray to some god who can change the rock sitting next to you into a cup of water. But if you understand the law of identity, if you understand that things are what they are, they have a certain definite nature, which can't be changed simply by wishing them to be different, by praying that they're different, then you'll recognize, all right, well, if I want water, I have to do something else. Maybe I have to go find a cactus and slice it open and see if I can squeeze some drops of water out of it. But simply hoping that this rock next to me is going to change into some water, well, that's not going to help, because A is A. Things are what they are, and their natures don't just change based on a desire or a feeling or a hope. So that was that's a little elaboration on the point I was making. I don't remember exactly what I said in that call, but I think the issue of praying to God was one example I gave. But also it comes up in, even if you're not a religious person, the issue of recognizing that things are what they are is still relevant. Like I think another example I gave in that call was Donald Trump denying the outcome of the 2020 election. Like, he claims that it was rigged, that it was stolen from him, that there was massive election fraud. I think that is also a case of him denying the law of identity, at least by implication. Right? Very few people will just come out right and say explicitly, no, A is not A, right? Because that's just obviously wrong. But people deny the law of identity by implication, usually, I think, when they deny things, whenever they're refusing to accept some fact. So in this case of Trump, he's refusing to accept the fact that the election results are as they are, namely that Biden won, that he lost, that 2020 was a loss for him, and he is not acting in accordance with that fact. He's not conceding defeat. He's pretending that the facts are other than they are, and then that leads him to tell lies about the election, and then eventually help incite an attack on the United States Capitol. So there's a lot of fallout from his initial lies, including the attack on the Capitol, which can be seen as results ultimately of him and many other people refusing to accept the law of identity, that things are the way they are.
So, am I correct in saying this is kind of more just like an exhortation to believe the truth, right, rather than any kind of wishful or comforting kind of lie, right?
Yeah, that's certainly part of it. You could see it as a kind of a positive and a negative aspect to it. So on the positive side, you can think of it as an exhortation to embrace the truth, accept the facts of reality. On the negative side, you can see it as a rejection, like reject falsehoods, at least what you know to be falsehoods. Reject the temptation to evade. So there can be a temptation to evade the facts, to pretend that they are different than they actually are, because you think you might want to. Maybe you think you can get some benefit by evading the facts. Like, if I pretend that I won, then I can get another 4 years in office. And
but I mean, you can see that that on its own, like, you kind of have to supply that with the premises that you believe are true for that to really mean anything, right? Because if like say some I don't know, what are these sort of like QAnon people come along, like one of them comes along and says, well, actually, Trump totally did win that election, and you're the one who's denying, right? They would just say that, right? And then it's like, well, now the law isn't really helpful. I have to resort to something else, which is you need to have to point out some facts in the real world. But you're kind of like, at that point, you've departed from being able to talk about a law of identity or something. And then I suppose secondly, it seems like that would also, taking this as like a fundamental principle, would kind of lead you to, I guess in your personal life, I don't think it would probably affect very many people, but over enough people that would make a difference. Where, for example, if you're in the desert, right, your example of like wishing that you could turn this rock into some water. Well, what if you didn't know that, cacti had water inside them, right? And then you're like, oh, I'm going to go cut open that plant, and I guess this water is going to magically flow out, right? Well, if someone was with you and he'd be like, well, I'm actually a cactus denier. I don't believe cacti have water in them. So you're a fool who's denying the law of identity by wishfully believing that you're just going to magically find exactly what you need inside this plant that's just right there, right? Like that would be, that's like a silly example, but you can see that would kind of apply to a lot of sort of paradigm shift events in history where, I don't know, someone go to like Einstein, like, wow, you believe that like what space curves? Oh, you're just clearly space doesn't curve. I have straight lines right here, and they don't get any less straight if I move them around. So I don't know. I guess those would be two things. One thing, it doesn't seem like it would be very immediately applicable to many situations, and the second thing is that if everyone really acted that way, it would be very difficult to improve on a lot of things because you need a certain amount of naive imagination to improve a lot of technology and a lot of ideas, I think. Although maybe that second point is that's not very ironclad.
Okay. So there's a few things that have come to mind from what you just said. One is you're reminding your voice. You sound like you're maybe from the UK. I don't know, Scotland or Ireland.
Yeah, I'm from Scotland. Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever heard of someone by the name of Liquid Zulu?
No, I haven't.
Okay, because that's the person who I was thinking of, and this is someone who is, I guess he knows about Ayn Rand for sure. I think he's even made videos about her. And, but anyways, I was for a little bit I was wondering, is this Liquid Zulu? Like, is he just calling in under a different name?
No, I've never heard of that guy.
But okay, yeah, I guess your screen name on YouTube is different. So I guess that's one side. I guess he could have a different account, but anyways, maybe my brain is going into like conspiracy mode because of this crazy call that happened earlier. But anyways, let me see if I can get my brain back on this topic. So so you raised so the issue of dishonesty came to mind as you were talking, because if there's someone like a QAnon person who has some crazy conspiracy idea about the 2020 election or something, and he says, "Well, you're the one who's evading. You're not. You're the one who's not facing the facts. I am the one embracing the law of identity." Well, I mean, there's nothing you can say that's going to force him to be honest about the facts. So all you can do is go by the judgments of your own minds, and you have to decide, what is true. And if you think someone else is being dishonest and refusing to face the facts, then I would just not engage with that person any further. So certainly he can say he's the one who's on the side of truth and I'm the one who's evading and not facing the facts. But I mean, I might entertain a discussion with someone who disagrees to a certain point. And if this person just came right out of the gate and said, I'm a QAnon guy, I think I would probably just immediately dismiss him and say, that's crazy. I'm not even going to engage with you. But if he didn't, like if he wore a mask, so to speak, and he was saying things that were more reasonable from the start, I would certainly entertain engaging in him in conversation for a while. And as long as he seemed reasonable and being good faith, open to sincere discussion, I would continue engaging. But if it started to seem like he was just being a troll, rude, obnoxious, dishonest, then once it got to that point, I would say, all right, well, we're done here. I'm not going to waste my time. I'm not going to keep talking to you. Um, so there's certainly no way to force someone to not say, you're the one who's evading the facts, but you just have to use your own mind and judge, is that a honest kind of response or not? So that's
But then, like, so you're using, but like, when you make that judgment, you're kind of, the law of identity isn't really helping you at all, right? Because you're making that judgment on, oh, this guy seems dishonest, which would obviously be true probably in that case, but like the law of identity isn't really acting very much here, right? Because it's, I mean, I guess maybe you could say, oh, like buried deep down in your thought process, the judgment on whether this guy's honest or not comes from the law of identity, but like you've just you kind of enter into a very relativistic mode where you're like, oh well, he obviously, everyone or almost everyone on Earth believes, if you ask them, they believe they're upholding the law of identity. So like, how do you know, other than your personal judgment, which is independent from the law of identity, how do you know that you're even following it? Well, you just kind of have to say, well, I'm pretty sure I am, which maybe true, maybe not. It's you wouldn't know, right? If you're wrong, you wouldn't know just by definition. So it's I guess it's just like, what's the content of the law here?
okay. By the way, I see someone else has just joined the waiting room. Zach Quince. That's another name I don't recognize. But anyways, maybe I don't know if I'm going to get to your call, Zach. I'm still going to be on this call for a while, I think, because it's going pretty well. I don't know how much time Arran has here, but I'm going to stick with his call for now. But if you do want to stick around, Zach, and maybe come on later, then please identify yourself in the YouTube chat and tell me if you have a different screen name in the YouTube chat. Please let me know that, or at least say something. If you have Zach Quince as your username, say something in the YouTube chat so I can see you there too. Okay. So how would the law of identity be used in this case? Well, you are like, if it's, I don't know if it's good to go back to the election example. Maybe we can try that. So if someone like, so I've read about the election and how there have been like 60 cases, court cases on this, or 61, and I think 60 out of the 61 were lost by Trump, or maybe they didn't even go to trial or something. I forget exactly what the statistics were on it, but anyways, I've observed some set of facts. I've read a set of facts, and if someone else says he's got some other set of facts that contradict what I claim, then I guess I just have to make a decision as to whether it's reasonable to believe that his side of the story is more plausible than mine. And that's just a judgment you have to make, and you can't avoid making. In some cases, it might be easier than others. So maybe a simpler case would be the rock example. So if you're in the desert and there's a rock next to you, and you say, "I see a rock," and someone else says, "No, there's no rock there." Well, what do you do at that point? I mean, you're looking with your eyes, and it doesn't get more basic than that. Just the evidence of your senses. So I don't think there is any reason to doubt yourself when you have direct sensory evidence of something. So if someone just claims, no, there's no rock there, I think it would be reasonable to just dismiss that claim as...
I guess it's because, like, everyone believes they have direct or well, indirect, I suppose, sensory evidence of whatever they believe. Like there's a very
Oh
small number of
yeah,
people.
that was another thing I wanted to reply to. I actually don't think it's the case that everyone believes they have the truth, that the truth is on their side. I think some people are dishonest and they know they're lying. They can certainly
Okay,
pretend.
but yeah, maybe in like in the immediate sense, but they would always be like, "Oh, but I'm lying because I need to do this other thing that's like really important." And so, like, maybe someone thinks that oh, Trump didn't actually win that election, but Trump is like so good that I just have to lie to make him, to like get people on his side. They would then believe, well, there's like a superior truth that's like behind all this, and that's why I'm actually doing this, right? Then the truth there would be like, oh, Trump is just that good, or whatever, So like, they
Okay,
would
well,
always,
yeah, I wouldn't say that's a case of everyone where or showing like everyone thinks they have the truth. I think in that case they might say, or what's actually going on there is in their mind they know they don't have the truth, at least on this point, as to whether Trump won in 2020. Now they might think there's a justification for lying about it. Maybe they've got some ulterior motive, and they think that it's warranted to lie about this thing in order to achieve this result. But that doesn't mean that they believe this thing. They don't doesn't mean they believe the lie.
that's fair. That's fair.
So there were one or two other issues you brought up in your last segment, or I don't know how many segments ago when you were talking, but I don't remember what they all were. But if there was some other aspect of this that you wanted to address, could you say it again? Because I don't remember.
One I brought up was, one that wouldn't be as relevant in someone's personal life. Or maybe it would, depending on what your job was, I suppose. But it definitely would be more relevant if we're talking about like a mass of people believing this. Is that if this is quite a lot of times this comes across like sort of an attitude thing. So if everyone takes the attitude that, well, it's just kind of like the way things are, and I'm not going to bother like trying to deny that or being wishful about something. That can lead to sort of like dampen, I guess maybe innovation is the word. It can dampen like leaps in or creativity, right? So the example I gave was that you have like two guys in the desert, right? And then one of them, neither of them know that cacti have water in them, and they both want water. So one of them's like, oh, I'm going to go like cut open that plant over there, and the other guy's like, a plant? All I see is this weird green spiky thing. I'm not going near that. You're a lunatic because you believe this weird wishful thinking thing where there's just going to be this water that you need, and it's just going to be inside this plant. And in that case, the second guy would die of dehydration, and the first guy would get all the water he needs, right? Or I gave another example. You can think of like scientific revolutions, right? Where, that was literally the case for someone like Einstein. He dreamed the theory of general relativity, right? And the process that you get to general relativity is actually, you're just like, well, I would really like it if we could explain gravity by the curvature of space, and then you tweak a couple of things to make the equations fit, and then that's it, right? You've got general relativity, or at least the basics of the theory. So if everyone just took the attitude of like, oh well, I'm never gonna apply some kind of like thinking that goes beyond the immediate bounds of what I know to be true for a fact, then we'd lose a lot of innovation. We'd lose a lot of like leaps from what we have. I'm trying to think maybe of like an example in something other than like science or engineering. Anyway, you can go from there.
Okay. Well, there's nothing about the law of identity that precludes imagination. The important thing I think would just be to recognize that it is imagination and not reality. So I can imagine a dragon, and I can write fiction about dragons, but I should recognize that I don't have evidence that dragons actually exist. Now, maybe there are certain things which some people are. There certainly are things like this where some people have evidence of them, but others don't. Like, say you've never seen a rainbow before, and someone tells you, sometimes when you look up in the sky, you see these huge arcs of different colors and like green and red and violet and yellow and orange. And if you've never seen something like this, you might think, oh, this person is just pulling my leg. There's nothing like this. Um, or you might say, okay, how can I see one of these things? Show me. Um, but I guess you don't have evidence of it if you haven't seen it yet, or at least been told about it by someone who you regard as reliable. So I think it's just important to recognize the epistemological state of something in your mind and not confuse the status it has. So one status, some claim could be made, and you can assign different statuses to it. Is it possible? Is it probable? Is it certain? Is it impossible? And I mean, depending on what it is, it could have, one or the other of these statuses. But just don't pretend it has a status that it doesn't have. Like dragons right now, I would say, I don't know what, in terms of those that I just rattled off, should I say it's possible? Should I say it's impossible? Maybe we could genetically change something so that something like a dragon one day did exist. But at least right now, I don't have evidence to think that there are such things as dragons. But it's fine to use your imagination and let your imagination run wild. And, maybe you could tell a fun story from that, or maybe if you're like Einstein, you could use your imagination to think about how the world might be structured that could help you understand things. So there's nothing wrong with using your imagination. Just recognize that it's not that just because you imagine something, that doesn't mean it's necessarily the way the world actually is. So.
Okay, so I suppose that there are situations. So the example, like thinking about dragon, and then okay, you can write fiction about that, or you can think of something. Those are sort of they're kind of physically fairly trivial examples where it's not that important whether or not the thing you're thinking of is actually true. But when something is like, it can carry a lot of weight to where. So I mentioned Einstein, right? Where like if he genuinely didn't believe that, and he thought, well, yeah, I guess it could be true, he probably would have given up a lot earlier. But maybe a better example than that would be like a political example. So would I be right in saying that one time that you would bring up the law of identity, like, well, someone who's like a communist, they're engaged in wishful thinking because they believe this communism thing can work, right? There's like some, they're imagining all sorts of things that are actually false about people or about economics or something. And this leads them to delude themselves into doing all the sorts of horrible things, right? Would that be a fair? I'm not going to start arguing for communism, by the way. I'm not going to
Well, with communism, there could be multiple things going on. So I think part of it is likely altruism. This is something Ayn Rand talks a lot about. If you hold a self-sacrificial view of morality, if you think it's good to live for the sake of others and to sacrifice your own interests, then a view like that can motivate something like communism, where you are just a cog in the machine, you're a cell in the of the collective. Like your life as an individual isn't the most important thing. That's not what should matter most to you. What should matter most to you is your role in serving the collective or the community, hence the name communism. What really is important is the group, not you as an individual. And I think if you hold the morality of altruism, which I think it came up in connection with Nietzsche before, this is a morality that's existed for centuries or millennia. And I think many people have been influenced by this sort of morality of self-sacrifice. And I think because many people adopt that morality, at least to a certain extent, that ripens them up a bit for social systems that really deny the value, the importance of individual human beings, and then they become more susceptible to something like communism. So I think that's part of the explanation it's not now maybe there's more to explain it that is more directly related to the law of identity. And I'm just thinking now of a connection that might be made. Like you might think, well, given the nature of human beings, if you understand the identity of human beings, then you will recognize that they are best suited, or the social system that suits them best is not communism. Rather, it's a system that respects individual rights, which on Ayn Rand's view, that would be capitalism. That's a big subject, which maybe we can talk more about. But it is part of Rand's view that there's a conflict between um, human nature and a system like communism. Like human nature does not fare well under communism. So you could think of communism as a war on the identity of human beings. There's actually there's a line in one of her, I think one of the characters from one of her novels. He says um, the law of, or the rights of man do not. I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but I could look it up, but I'm not sure it's worth the time to find it. Um, Rights of man are not a result of congressional law or divine law. Rather, they're a result or an expression of the law of identity. So it's very common for people to cite God as the source of rights. Like even in the Declaration of Independence of the United States, it says men are endowed by their creator with these unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So they have a theistic sort of view of the source of rights. And now, if you reject that, you might have a more social view of the source of rights. You might say, okay, well, rights, I grant they don't come from God. I'm a secular person, but I do think rights come from government. So you might think, that the Soviet commissar or the Nazi government or whatever bestows its rights upon the citizens. So that's kind of a social view of the source of rights. If you think rights come from government, and if the government says you don't have a right to abortion, well, then you don't have a right to abortion. If it says you do have a right to abortion, then you do have a right to abortion. Now, Ayn Rand rejects both of those, and she says, rights don't come from God, and they also don't come from government. They come from the law of identity. They come from your nature as a human being. Now, the government does, on her view, it can recognize and protect your rights, and that's what its proper role is. It doesn't grant you the rights. It doesn't bestow them on you. Rather, it just it recognizes the rights that you already have as a human being, given your nature, given your identity, and then it protects those rights by basically there's three functions of the government to protect rights. There's the police, the military, and the courts. Police protect you from domestic criminals. Military protects you from foreign threats. And then the courts settle disputes between people, so they don't have to resort to force. You can just settle them peacefully in a law court. But anyways, it's because human beings have a certain nature, in other words, a certain identity, that it's appropriate to think they have rights. And we can talk about more what rights are if you want. And since human beings have those rights, then the point I want to make is they have the rights because of their nature. So I'm just trying to make a tie here, a connection between the law of identity and the issue of rights, political rights. But I don't want to go on for too long. I want to give you a chance to respond if you want to jump in here and say something at this point.
Yeah, I guess we've wandered a bit far from from what I was saying originally. Let me just gather my thoughts for a second. Yeah, right. Okay, sorry. So I think what I was getting at was the right, yeah. So the difference between these sort of more trivial things and these things that require you to invest. Yeah, I guess it's kind of like cynical terminology. They require you to invest a lot of time and effort into. So, if somebody had looked at okay, well, yeah, okay. So we look at it like the reason I asked you is because you'd say, okay, well, maybe we look at like a communist and say, yeah, well, okay, well, your plan will not succeed because this is violating like the law of identity. These imaginary qualities of human beings that you think they'll fare well under communism. So that it wouldn't succeed. But there are all sorts of things where you look at someone and think, okay, this is just on plain common sense. I can use facts and logic to deduce that this person won't succeed. Like if you'd looked at, like, I don't know, like Lenin or something, right, before the revolution, you'd go, Vladimir, you're full of yourself. You think you're going to conquer Russia and create this like utopian socialist state. You're nuts, man, right? You're clearly not, like, clearly the human nature will not, I don't know, let's just say an imaginary objector will go like, clearly the nature of the Russian peasantry and the Russian proletariat, they're not going to just stake everything in this new country you just made up, right? And then obviously you'd be proven wrong, right? Because he did succeed in the war. No, he maybe didn't succeed in creating the ideal state afterwards, but that's kind of less the point, right? So I think what I was getting at is that it's not just as simple as, yeah, you're right, we can distinguish between what we think could be true or isn't true, but we still like to imagine what if it was. But a lot of these, big changes, these big leaps actually require someone to genuinely believe it's true, because otherwise you will just never get the investment of time and effort that requires it to actually actualize it as a thing. And maybe I should think of a third example, but like also I've given an example of like a scientific theory, a political project. You could probably think of other things, right? Like I guess you could think of like any artist basically at all, right? Like I'm sure there are, for every great artist who has to spend his entire life suffering and then is only recognized in his greatness later on, there are probably tens of thousands of people who did very similar things but were never recognized as great at all. So common sense would dictate, you're like, well, looking at the law of identity, I'm looking at your work here, and yeah, your poems are like, yeah, they're all right, but whatever, you're not going to be a great man. And then the person you're talking to could easily turn out to be a great poet. I suppose the underlying stratum behind all these examples, the underlying features here, is that you never have enough knowledge to perfectly apply like a law of identity or something, right? Because you just have a finite amount of knowledge. So you always have to be prepared for the possibility that you're missing anything at all or quite a lot. And then I guess it just comes back to that like relativist thing I was talking about, where you're correct, you just have to use judgments. But now we're like, well, where are we with the law of identity? It doesn't really, like you can throw it out and your judgment will be not that impaired, to be honest, it seems.
Okay, I'm not sure. I'm trying to get to like the essence of what your point is, or what the sort of objection you're raising, and I think I'm getting at least a feel for it. So maybe, and you can tell me when you come back, if this is part of what you're saying, is like the law of identity just doesn't supply enough information for me to make certain judgments. So let me just address that for a second. So it's certainly the case that you need to know much more than the law of identity to make a rational judgment about almost anything. I think it's not like just knowing the law of identity tells you what the right political system is or the right ethical system is. You need to make other sorts of observations. If you think Einstein is right about the nature of the universe, you can't just deduce the theory of relativity from the law of identity, or you can't deduce that capitalism is the proper social system just from the law of identity. You have to make many, many, many observations, and this could, and maybe it involves a certain amount of the use of imagination in certain cases, like the Einstein case. So I don't want there to be an impression at all that um, that I think or that Rand thinks that all you need to know is the law of identity, and then you can just kind of turn off your senses, and you can just think about it, and you can somehow unpack all this other knowledge. No, that's not the view. You have to make all kinds of observations. It's just that they all ultimately presuppose or depend on a recognition of the law of identity. And if some idea you come up with somehow contradicts that, then you've made a mistake somewhere, and you have to rethink things. But
I guess like what
go
I
ahead.
was saying is that how are you going to know when something actually contradicts the law of identity, and how do you know when like that could just be, oh, it turns out what I believed before is wrong and what I believe now is true. So you believe space is flat, right? And then, oh, this guy comes along and says, oh, well, what if space was curved? And you're like, well, that would mean that space is both curved and not curved. That violates the law of identity. It can't be true. But you don't know which one of those two options, which horn of the dilemma is the correct one to slide down on, right? You just know that they can't both be true at the same time.
Yeah, I think you could say that. But I mean, you could also, I mean, actually, whether space could actually is the sort of thing that could be curved, I think is a good question. I don't think space is a thing. Like is space is it's a relation between things, but it's not a thing in itself that could be curved or flat. It's like it's the absence of something. So I don't think it's right to say that space is curved. Now maybe there's something else. Maybe there's an ether. I know there's some objectivists, philosophers who I think who are also interested in science, or maybe I should say scientists who are also interested in philosophy. I'm not sure exactly how to classify them, but I've heard some discussion by people in the objectivist world discussing fundamental concepts in physics like space. And I've heard them say, at times at least, things like it doesn't make sense to refer to space as being something curved or straight.
Well, I mean, this could be a kind of a terminology thing. In the theory of relativity, it would be, there is no independent space object that is itself curved. But it's like the path that things take. We kind of have to say they take a path in space, right? Even if it's just like a manner of speaking, because otherwise the English wouldn't make sense. But the paths curve, and that is kind of the same thing as saying, like, well, the space that they move in is curved.
Yeah, I don't want to get too deep into the issue of like how to conceptualize space, because I don't think that's really the essential point here. I want to somehow tie it to the law of identity. That's really the issue. So it is true that if there's some there could be a contradiction. You might not know which side of it is true. Like in a murder trial, right? Did O.J. Simpson commit murder, or did he not commit murder? Well, he either did or he didn't, but they can't both be true. It can't both be true that he committed murder, and it also be true that he did not commit murder. So that you have to choose one of those by the law of excluded middle. But to figure out which one is actually true, well, you need to follow the evidence. So that's why we have a court system to gather evidence, like DNA and who was where at what time. All kinds of things go into it, but ultimately you have to make a judgment based on the evidence that you have and go with that. There's no. Well, I mean, what would be the alternative?
Well, exactly. This brings us back to, I guess, the very, very original example I brought up when I called in. But someone who's praying, right? They've done the same thing, and they've just made a judgment that actually they believe that prayer does work. So,
well, I don't think so. I think there.
No?
I don't think there's a. Well, so here's what I want to think about. Like, what is the process by which someone reaches the conclusion that prayer works? Like, did they did they do it before and it did work? Like, did they try to pray to some allegedly existing god to change a rock into a bottle of water or a banana, and then it happens? And then therefore the next day they tried again because they saw it succeeded the previous day? I don't think so. Or did they just see somebody else, maybe an older person, who maybe when they were a child, they saw older people praying and they just picked it up from them, and they didn't really have any independent evidence of their own, but they thought, oh, well, a bunch of people are doing this, so maybe I should try that too. So
But there are lots of people who say they've witnessed miracles or something like that, right?
yeah, so I don't think there's really a process by which people could rationally conclude. At least I'm not aware of um, a process by which people could rationally conclude that prayer is effective. I mean that also presupposes the existence of God. If you think the way it works is you pray to some God, some supernatural being, and then he grants your prayer. I mean, a lot of these people, they buy into something like faith, and they might even say explicitly, I think faith is good. I believe in God, and I have faith in God. Well, faith, what I think that is precisely the opposite of having evidence. It's believing something without evidence. So I don't think there is rational justification for believing that prayer works, such that I think someone who says it works is like in equivalent position to someone who says it doesn't work. Um, so
But I mean,
yeah, yeah.
does faith does taking something on faith necessarily mean that the results of that or the consequent judgments you make because of that violate the law of identity? Because there are
So,
lots of things that you take on faith, right? Like, for example, that the evidence of your eyes and ears is reliable, even though we know it's not reliable all the time. You have to kind of, well, on faith, I'm going to take that I'm not just experiencing a constant optical illusion,
okay,
even though you can
so
never prove that. Right?
yeah, I think of the senses as being axiomatic, maybe I should say. Like they're not the sort of thing that needs to be proved. They are the basis of proof. Now this gets into some issues of epistemology, which you can look into if you read in the objectivist literature. But on Rand's view, it's what's called a stolen concept to think that uh, the senses need to be proved. I don't know if I exactly how I want to explain this, but let me just say, and maybe I'll go into it some more detail. The senses are automatically valid. There's no issue of choice there. They can't distort things. So if I look at a pencil in water, and you might say, well, it appears bent. Well, my senses are not deceiving me. They're just presenting me with information, and I have to interpret that information and decide, for instance, in this case, well, is the pencil really shaped in a way that if I pulled it out of the water, it would have this bent sort of shape, or not? Would it appear straight if I pulled it out of water? But your senses don't give you the answers to that question. So I'll just say, and we can go back and forth on this some if you want. The senses don't deceive, um, and they are the basis of proof. There's no you prove things ultimately by means of sensory evidence. Like if I want to prove that O.J. Simpson committed a murder, well, I'm ultimately gonna say, well, look at this DNA evidence. You can look through the microscope and see that the blood on the glove that was left at the scene of the crime is the same, matches the same blood that's, we did a blood draw from when we tested O.J. Simpson's blood. And we can just see by looking at our instruments that these come out the same. So what are you going to use by appeal to what? Are you going to say that the senses are wrong? Something non-sensory? Well, it's not based on anything. It's incoherent. The senses are your foundational contact with reality. You can't get any deeper than that. So it would be a mistake to think you can prove that the senses are correct. But let me just pause there and see what you want to say.
Yeah, okay. So I'll say first, I think that is a reasonable position. I'm not gonna. Wait, can you hear me? Sorry, is the mic? Yeah.
Yeah, it was a little soft for a second, but
yeah.
maybe you just pulled your head
I
away.
guess two things. So the first one, it isn't saying that something doesn't need to be proved. It's just true. It's the basis from which proof is derived. Is that not just the very same thing as faith? And then secondly, the example of so okay, if you have a pencil in water, it looks bent, but it actually isn't. Well, that's fine because the light reaching your eyes, you're still receiving correct information on that, and it's the judgment in that case of assuming the pencil is actually bent is wrong. That's fine, but that kind of logic doesn't really work when it comes to more subtle examples. Like, so I have to wear glasses. It looks like you do as well, right? So if we both took our glasses off, we'd be like, whoa, there's like loads of blurry things all over the place, and all of a sudden, we actually have to use judgment to correct the evidence of our senses because things aren't blurry in real life. They actually have sharp, defined edges. And what I'm getting at there is that everything, even though it doesn't seem like it, everything we use kind of has to involve some judgments, even of the basic sense data. Because when I look at something and I'm perceiving colors and all this sort of stuff, there is a certain amount of judgment going on there, even if it seems like it's so simple. Just the ability to perceive different colors is probably related to a very quick judgment. I mean, maybe that's a bit too far, but I guess the main point is that there are examples of where it's not the judgment that's at fault; it's actually the sensory perception, and you have to use judgment to correct it, which means that the senses can be considered at fault, right? So those would be my two contentions with that.
Okay. Okay, I want to address those, but just first, want to take a quick look at the chat, which I haven't looked at in a while. Okay, it looks like there's just been a few the new ones that have coming in, maybe some silly ones. Maybe there's a troll in there. And maybe I'll delete that later or block this person. But I don't have it. See, I don't have time to look at the chat while I'm having a phone call, so I can't keep up with both. If I had a moderator, I guess that would be helpful. But right now I'm just doing everything myself. So if there is some troll in the chat or someone who's just being silly, then I guess you can just ignore that person rather than just feed their appetite by replying. Not that anyone is replying. I'm just reading what this person wrote. Yeah, so I might just delete any chats later that I think are troll or silly chats. And okay, I'm going to go back to the call now. So thanks for that little, or sorry about that little interruption. So I think there were two issues I wanted to reply on. One is there is something that's called self-evidence. And that's not something you take on faith. So there's not an infinite need of proving something. Like, how do you know this? Well, because of that. How do you know that? Well, because of this other thing. How do you know this other thing? Well, because of this fourth thing or whatever. There can't be like an infinite levels of proving things. There are some things you just know directly, and that's what's called the self-evident. And that is what we know through our senses. That's the basis, that's the foundation on which other things have to be reduced to in order to prove. Like, how do I prove that O.J. Simpson was the murderer? Well, ultimately, because I see maybe there's DNA evidence which I can look at with my eyes through the microscope or whatever, and that's where I stop. That's when we say, okay, you've now established. But now, if you say, well, how do I prove my eyes are giving me the correct info? There's no way to do it, and there's no need to do it. But that then gets to the second point that I wanted to make. So you were addressing, or you were raising this point about like how we wear glasses, and if we take our glasses off, things are blurry, and we're not seeing things correctly. But actually, I think there is no such thing as seeing things incorrectly or correctly. We just see things. Now, you can see things that things can certainly have different forms, and when you're not wearing your glasses, then things appear blurry, and when you are wearing them, things appear sharp, or at least sharper. But it's not like one of those is the correct way. You could say one is more helpful. It's more helpful to us to be able to see things from as having sharper edges, but that doesn't mean we're seeing them more correctly. It's not, there is no way things are in reality apart from the way we perceive them that is the correct way of perceiving them. I mean, things have a certain nature independent of the way we perceive them, but we perceive things in a certain form. There's what's called the form-object distinction in objectivism, Ayn Rand's philosophy. In this, I don't know if exactly that same terminology is used outside of objectivism, but at least within objectivism, there's what's called the form-object distinction. So there's something that you are perceiving, but you always perceive that in a certain form, given the nature of your sensory apparatus, and the way you perceive something might be the way different than the way someone else perceives the same thing. But that doesn't mean you're not perceiving the same thing. It just means you're perceiving the same thing in a different form. So if you have perfect 20/20 vision, and you're looking at something that is without glasses, you have 20/20 vision, and you're looking at a rock that's, a few feet away, and someone else who has not 20/20 vision and looks at the same rock, they're looking at the same thing, the same object, but they're perceiving that object in a different form. And it's not that one of them is perceiving it correctly and the other is perceiving it incorrectly. It's that one of them is perceiving it in a way that's more helpful to their survival. They're able to navigate the world more easily, and than the other person who's not. But it's not that one perception is incorrect. Or now it's well, maybe I'll just pause at that point, and yeah, if you want to jump in now and say something, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I think about the second one. I'll say something about the first one. So I agree that what you said is correct about kind of just reaching a stopping point in justification, right? And you say, well, I've got to my senses, and that's just it. It's just true. What I see is just, or hear whatever, what I see is just true. That's a brute fact, and I can't really go any further as far as justification goes. But I think maybe you can see that someone could, maybe pick is the wrong word, but someone could have a different sort of basis there, right? Like if you're Descartes, right? Like he thought about this and he gets to, well, I actually don't trust anything at all. So he just gets to, well, I just exist. And that's a fact I have to agree on. So for him, and then he then, in his meditations, he tries to then derive all these things about like, oh, well, how can I trust my senses? Because I think he starts by going, well, what if I exist? And then he starts thinking about, oh, well, if I exist, there must be like I think he goes for a benevolent God, right? And then he says, well, that means I can trust my senses. So for him, he would actually reach his senses and go, well, actually, I still can't trust these. I still have to go even further. And then eventually he would just reach the brute fact of, the cogito, his own existence. So while I do agree with the idea, like in practice, that doesn't really provide a good reason why someone just go, well, actually, I've just decided I believe in, I believe in God, or I believe in my own existence primarily, and then maybe after that I'll derive that my senses are okay. I'll deduce that. There's not doesn't provide any kind of reason for your senses being the one that you have to choose as being fundamental, other than, well, yeah, I guess you'd go for that. But then the second one, I guess it is kind of true that there's not a, like, correctness kind of implies a sort of level of judgment which you don't have to apply to the senses. And if someone sees something that's blurry, well, they just see something that's blurry. That's just okay. It doesn't have to be correct, but it still kind of impairs your like, we still recognize like a certain incorrectness. If someone's like colorblind, right, and they look at, I don't know, was it like red and green, right? Maybe they can't tell the difference, and they look at two things, one's red and one's green. They're like, no, those are the same color. Maybe one of them's like a poisonous frog and it's red, and the other one's a non-poisonous frog and it's green. Well, okay, maybe, yeah, you're right. It is just more helpful. It's not incorrect, but we still have a feeling that one of those ways of seeing the world is wrong in some manner, and I think that is. That is a pretty useful point to use to then say, well, okay, maybe the senses aren't the end of it. Maybe there's something I have to justify my senses with, because as far as I know, there could be all sorts of things. Well, I do know, as a matter of fact, right? We all know sort of wavelengths we can't see, sound frequencies we can't hear, but there are all sorts of things that we can't perceive with our senses, and we actually have to adduce with judgment. And even though you would then say, okay, well, in the end, let's say there's these frequencies you can't hear with your ears, well, use a computer and then you use your senses to look at the frequency chart on a computer, and that's how you know those frequencies exist. So you're still using your senses, but you would never have got to this building this computer and using it to detect these frequencies if you just said, well, there's just the ones I can hear and that's it. So I do agree that what you're saying is kind of correct, but I just think that the fact that you have to go to these lengths to justify the senses kind of indicates that there is a level of justification behind them that most people are implicitly appealing to when they use their senses.
Okay. So I guess there's two sorts of points again that I want to address. Which one to start with? So I don't think the senses need to be justified, because I think they are the basis of justification. Now they can be, maybe you can use the term validated. This term, it comes up in a book called Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand by Leonard Peikoff, when he's talking about the axioms of the philosophy, one of which is the law of identity, actually. And he says that you can't prove the axioms, but you can show that they are implicit in all other knowledge. Like, all other knowledge depends on them. There's a technique called reaffirmation through denial, which Aristotle, I think, may have been the first to identify. But it's a technique of showing how you cannot coherently deny the truth of something. Like if you tried to say A is not A, well, in order to make any sense out of that, you ultimately have to rely on its contradictory, namely that A is A. So there's not a way to prove that A is A itself is correct, but you can show how it is implicit in all other knowledge, how any attempt to deny it is incoherent. And I think this is the case with the senses. You can't prove that they are correct, but you can prove that they are the basis of all knowledge and therefore don't need to be proved. That might actually have been a third point that I wanted to mention. But let me go back to what I was thinking are the first 2 points I was going to make. So Descartes, you brought up, who famously in his work, The Meditations, he tries to sweep aside all his knowledge and find some one firm point, some bedrock that he can build upon and base all of his knowledge on. And he thinks he reaches this with the cogito. I think, therefore I am. However, uh, I think he might be circular in the way he tries to validate that. Like he might say that there needs to be a benevolent God who's not going to deceive him in order um, to believe that he actually does exist. But somehow he needs the cogito to establish God, but also God to establish the cogito or something. I forget exactly how it goes, but I know that scholars have referred to something called the Cartesian circle and how Descartes tries to run his argument. So it ultimately doesn't work. It's a circular sort of argument. That's the upshot, if I recall. I'm not a Descartes scholar, and it's been a while since I've studied him, but I don't think Descartes' philosophy works ultimately. At least his epistemology. I don't think he has a coherent view of knowledge. Um, and we could talk more about that, but I do think that he's in an incoherent sort of position if he thinks that he needs to prove that his senses are reliable. Um, yeah, I think there's something incoherent about that. I don't think there's a way to prove anything without already relying on the senses. So I guess it would be circular. Um, and then I'll make maybe one other point before coming back to you. So you mentioned the like being colorblind as I guess I'm not sure exactly how you put it, but so that's a case where I would say someone is perceiving the world in a way that's less helpful than if they did have color. It's not incorrect, but it is less helpful. So if there were a way to restore their color vision, if they used to have it, or to give it to them in the first place, if they never had it, then I think that would be a good thing for them to choose to do, because it is more helpful, but it's not more correct. And I think that's an important point to make when we're talking about epistemology, the basic nature of knowledge. The senses cannot be incorrect. Now, that's not to say they're omniscient. They don't tell you everything about the world. You also mentioned frequencies. There are certain frequencies which can't be detected without the aid of a computer, I think you said. And also we know that other organisms can perceive different frequencies of things. Like I think dogs, they can hear higher pitched noises, and they can certainly smell things, more things than human beings can. And human beings, even the same human being, their own sensory abilities can change across time depending on their conditions. Like if you have a cold, you might be able to, you might not be able to smell as much as if you don't have a cold. But in all these cases, it's just what's happening. There's a different sensory mechanism at play, engaging with the world, and you're able to pick up more or less information about the world depending on the kind of sensory apparatus that you have at a given time. And it's not that one information is correct and the other is incorrect. It's an issue of more and less. Like I have less information about the world when it comes to smelling things than a dog can pick up. But having less information doesn't mean I have incorrect information. It just means I have less information. Likewise, if one person is seeing the world in black, white, and gray, they pick up less information than someone who has color vision. It's not that the black and white sided person is getting incorrect data. It's just they're getting less data about the world. Okay, I'm going to come back to you. I see one or two other people have tried to call in, but then they've hung up. So I don't know if they've given up or what. But if you want to, oh, I see Darwin is trying to call in. Okay, Darwin. Oh, and then Darwin said a minute later he had to go. So I missed you two streams in a row. Sorry about that, Darwin. if you maybe if you come in earlier in the stream, then I'll be able to get you into my queue more likely. But Saturday I plan to do another stream, so maybe you can come back on that stream. Jonathan Honig, welcome. Good to see you. He definitely I see him come up in you're on Brooks stream sometimes. He says, "Keep it up, man." $. Yeah, I'm trying to make some dollars from this, and once I get to 1,000 subscribers, then I can apply to YouTube to have my channel monetized. So if you want to help me get there, I definitely appreciate it. If you're not subscribed, if you want to help me get to the 1,000 subscriber mark, that would be great. So thanks, Jonathan. And he also says, keep spreading the good word reason. Absolutely. Definitely. Okay, good to see some more people here in the chat. And I'm glad we're having I got a call. This is a good conversation where we're covering some material which I haven't covered much before, or at least certainly haven't gone into this kind of depth on this sort of material about perception in particular. I don't recall an in-depth conversation on perception and its epistemological role like this before. So I'm really glad that Arran has come on to talk about this. All right, so that was just a brief little aside to engage with chat. I'm going to come back to you now, Arran. So the floor is yours.
Okay. I was just gonna say I'd probably have to go fairly soon, so I'll say something that I'll let you reply, and then I'll head off.
Okay.
But, yeah. Okay. So I still think that I'm not a Cartesian, but I still think that Descartes' argument there is still applicable in this case. Like nothing about this idea of taking senses as you say, self-evidence kind of really refutes it, because you say, okay, well, I just take the senses as primary, and I don't need to prove anything about them. Okay, fine. But then if someone thinks like Descartes, they're just going to say, well, actually, I do need to prove more things, so I don't trust my senses. And it's like we don't really have any. You have no way of convincing this person. But there's nothing you can really say, and you're like, well, to this person that would make them think that they don't have to go all the way down to this level of okay, I have to actually. What's implicit in everything for them is that I exist or they exist, right? Not that the senses are valid, because they would say even if something in my reasoning implies the use of sense perception, well, that's actually predicated on me existing. So any case where you would point out as evidence of the senses being self-evident, they would say, well, actually, that's actually evidence of the self, the existence of the self being self-evident. So, like I said, I would agree that there are problems with Descartes' later arguments, but I still think that in this case, it's that sort of thinking kind of illustrates the problem where people who place two different things as primary. So in this case, it would be the senses, and then someone else places the existence of them, the ability to tell that you exist, and then maybe a third person would place like a god that they believe in, right? So they place that as being primary instead. These three people have no way of really, there's no rational argument they can use to convince one or the other that they're right. And again, you're kind of in the position of, well, we kind of have to move beyond this. I don't know. It's just up to you and just use your judgment. So I know that's not like a slam dunk argument or anything, but I just think that, these arguments have been brought are kind of inadequate to dealing with that sort of situation.
Okay. All right. So some thoughts on that. There is the fundamental axiom of Ayn Rand's philosophy is existence exists, which I haven't mentioned before. I've talked about how the senses are axiomatic, or sort of. I'm not sure if that's the best word, but they're somehow foundational. But it's also the case in Ayn Rand's philosophy that certain axioms are foundational, and she has three axioms. So one is existence exists, and then that has there are two corollary axioms. So I guess they're not exactly at the same level, but they are corollaries. Like implicit in grasping the idea that existence exists, or to put it in other words, what is that you are conscious of that fact, right? You couldn't grasp that unless you were conscious. So her second axiom is the axiom of consciousness. And then the other corollary is the law of identity, namely that something exists. And that's what you grasp when you say existence exists. You couldn't grasp it if it weren't something. It has to be something in particular. It has to have a certain nature, a certain identity. Now, I guess to specify it a little more, you could talk about, okay, well, what is the nature of the consciousness which grasps that something exists? What are the means by which your consciousness grasps that something exists? Well, it's by means of the senses. So it's, I guess the issue of sense perception is sort of implicit in the axiom of consciousness. The senses are the means, are the specific way consciousness grasps that something exists. Now, to identify this explicitly, you need a further level of consciousness beyond the sensory or perceptual level, which is the conceptual level, which distinctively humans have. So to recognize explicitly that existence exists, you need more than just sense perception. You need conception. I just wanted to, I guess, broaden the scope a bit as to the nature of this foundational level that's we have evidence of. Because you had mentioned Descartes cites something other than the senses as being his foundation, namely that he exists. And that reminded me, okay, well, there is something about existence, a statement about existence that is foundational in Ayn Rand's view as well, which is this axiom, existence exists. But it's not entirely distinct from the issue of the senses, because it is the senses which is what gives us evidence that something exists. So there's a connection between the issue of existence and the issue of the senses. And I just wanted to say a bit to kind of tie those together. But I think Descartes he's not just referring to existence. He's particularly referring to his own existence. He says, I think, therefore I exist. But I don't think the self is the foundation of knowledge. Like we start, we learn first that there's an external world, or that there is a world. And later we learn, oh, I exist. There's a perceiver of that world. But if you're just a baby, or if you're an animal and you're not self-reflective, you don't introspect. I think that's a skill that most people learn to develop eventually. But if you're just a baby, or you're a frog, or a dog, you're just looking out at the world and you're not really aware of yourself as a perceiver in the way that you can be once you mature somewhat as an adult. So I think Descartes is getting ahead of himself in thinking that the foundational axiom is I think, therefore I exist. Much more basic, or at least more basic than that, is simply something exists. And later he can reflect and realize that he exists. So that's, let's see, did I want to say anything else? I don't remember, but anyways, I don't know if you said that was I think you said that was your last point, but I see you're still here. So if you want to come back and say anything else.
I'll be heading off. A good chat. Yeah. All right. Thanks for the talk.
Yeah, sure thing. And I'm really glad you called in. I thought that was a good conversation. So thank you very much. And I see there were some other people, as I mentioned, who tried to call in, but didn't get to you today. So hopefully I'll be able to take your calls on another stream. All right. I think this is a good point to end today's stream. When about 2.5 hours, looks like. So I plan to do another stream on Saturday, probably around the same time, 1 p.m. Pacific. So hopefully I'll see some of you there. If you did like this stream, I'd appreciate it if you give it a like. And also, I definitely appreciate any new subscribers. All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming by, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.